Okay, we're back.
We are back.
We're charging. We're fired up. We're ready to go. It's been a busy day for me, but I'm glad to see you guys because I think we got an important one tonight,
It's a goodie.
and it's sort of right on point with the two-age sojourning thing, and it's fairly recent, so it's kind of relevant, which is unusual for us to do something relevant and popular. So
I
this
think
might
when you say relevant, it's still a fairly niche relevance.
Yeah.
But
it's niche, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that being said, we're going to talk about a debate, and we'll give you the details in a second. But it's a debate that actually reminds me I need to stop saying things like I've just said because really it reminds me that the two age two kingdom thing is epically relevant. And we all kind of know that, but we get used to it. And then when you know it, people disagree, and but then all of it, every now and again, you just come face to face with it, and you realize in the volatile age in which we live in the complicated age in which we're moving toward, with regards to plurality and with regards to secularity, and even confrontation with that and persecution and so forth. This is just, I don't know, by the gospel itself, which is actually related, in every level, as we'll talk about tonight. But this subject, like next to the gospel, it's one of those parallel subjects to law and gospel for me, which I couldn't maybe I should say outside of Christology itself, is
What is the mission of the church?
right.
what is the mission of the church? But also, it's going to become super important as we continue to see the change in culture away from Christianity and how Christians respond to that. And just our frustration and our expectation. I think because thinking wrongly about this could be a matter of it could be a real source of discouragement for some Christians if they wrongly interpret what is happening, to see it as a kind of failure on God's part or something.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about? We're talking about a debate that we recently got put onto. Was this your doing, Andre? It must have been.
So, let me tell you how we got here.
Okay.
So James White had Joseph Boot on recently to talk about two kingdoms.
Yes. All right. And by the way, we've had a few requests to look at that talk, and we're onto it. We know about it. We'll get there.
Yeah.
So just if someone's listening,
Well, this is sort of the background to that talk.
Yes. Good.
So someone put me onto that, and so I checked it out. There's a sort of a 20-minute clip by Alpha and Omega on YouTube, which I watched. And I've got the Joseph Boot's book on the mission of the church somewhere around here. And so I thought, I need to just maybe do a little homework on Joseph Boot. What's he all about? And so as I was scrolling down the YouTube comments, I saw Brandon Adams. Brandon Adams said, I've commented on this and this and this. And so I thought, let me check out what he said over there.
Yeah.
So I clicked onto his Two Kingdoms debate between Tuininga and Boot.
Yep.
And picked up the debate, and that's the debate we're looking at now.
All right. Great. There we go. So if someone wants to find the debate that we're referencing, I suppose.
So the Ezra Institute is basically, so it's Two Kingdoms and Cultural Obedience is the name of the page. It's at the EzraInstitute.ca, Canada, which is where Joseph Boot is based.
That's true. So I might go ahead and put a link on the show notes for this one. Good. Just to make sure.
Do you promise?
No, I don't promise because I might forget. So let me just.
You can always do, Google search Joe Boot versus Matt Tuininga, Tuininga, Tuininga.
Yes. And we will approach the subject just as a bit of a caveat up front, in the manner that we normally do.
Totally professional, completely exhaustive, authoritative,
very
and
systematic.
the last word on every.
Okay. Wait. I do need to say something about this because I actually did have a few just before we get going on this. Here's the wrestle I have. It comes out in me mostly when we hit subjects like this one particularly, because my instinct, and this is what I think all of us, we listen to a debate like that. I mean, I just want to get down. I want to take copious notes. I want to look at it all. I want to read it all. I want to, and then I want to present something on it in a really systematic way, which is what we typically do. And this is what we're all pastors. This is what we do. Okay. But now, one of the things about this podcast, the reason I wanted us to do a podcast, just thinking of Andrea and myself and Nick and myself, we've always just had these theological talks, and I know what happens you don't prepare for those talks, right? When we're having them personally,
I prepare for those talks.
no, you don't.
Not even you, Nick.
Not even you. Not even you. But the thing is, like, typically we'll talk, and I've always felt this, but it's just been some real benefit in that. As long as you wouldn't record something, you wouldn't normally put it out there because it's not planned. It's like it's not going to be systematic, and it's not going to address everything perhaps in the way that you would if you were presenting a counter argument or so forth. But there is real value in just doing something like this, I think. And I'm constantly, just for anyone who's listening in on this, I'm resisting the urge to go more programmatic. I think that there are enough things like that out there. You can go and find the blog that's written against that and blah, blah. But I think just to have a conversation around it is a good starting point. There might be more that needs to be done, but just a initial starting point, just to rope people in that conversation, I think is a good thing. And that's kind of one of the things we're just playing with the podcast. To keep it sustainable, to keep it doable, to keep it enjoyable, and because we're gonna have these talks anyway. That's the bottom line. Like, I was just gonna get on the phone with Nick and Andre anyway, and so it's like we're just doing this. So let's just make it a little bit more inclusive and hopefully helpful to people. So just that as a caveat, but also just kind of a mission statement with the podcast as well,
and a confession.
And a confession. That's true. And I think
an adjustment of expectations.
Yeah, that's true. But with that in mind, I mean, I think there is hopefully something we could bring out. I mean, we have thought about it, and it's not like we're just shooting from the hip here. The whole, I mean, maybe it's just a good way to start is just to ask, what are your overall impressions? I'll start. Can I start?
Yes, please.
I just let's
start.
I
didn't imagine it any other way, Mike.
All right. Well, I won't take long, but I just want to say I really appreciate Matthew Tuininga. I've dealt with him with his work a lot, and I noticed in the debate that the book hadn't come out yet.
Prior to his book.
Yeah. So I've got the book, read the book. Obviously, it's featured a bit in my dissertation. But in general, I find him to be very, very helpful, very balanced, very nuanced, very. He's not too. I think he's often pitted against Van Drunen in a way that is not entirely fair to Van Drunen. But, I think they're closer than people would care to admit sometimes. But the reality is, just because of his Calvin kind of take on things, he's getting out of the Klein aspect and kind of moving at it from a little bit more of a traditional
historical theology.
And bringing in some categories that aren't the main line of the normal conversation via Van Drunen. Not that Van Drunen leaves those out, though. And I want things like two-age eschatology and just the two governments and Wick. I mean, Van Drunen knows his stuff, and he also talks about that stuff. But Tuininga has really majored in on a helpful point of there's been a question mark over what Van Drunen has said, for example, about Calvin and some other theologians. Guys like Tuininga are really helpful because they come in and go, actually, what he said is legit. And here we go. Here's my dissertation to prove it. And of course, as would come with more study on that particular point, there's a bit more roundedness. There's a bit more nuance that he brings to the table, particularly thinking about Calvin and his application to contemporary political engagement all the way through to just the broader two kingdom category. But in the debate, I felt the whole way through, it's frustrating when you hear someone represent the position that you're for badly, and I don't feel that happened. I felt that he did a great job. In bringing that across, and the questions he asked, the way he responded, all very, very helpful. Not combative at all, but moving the thing forward as best as possible. Really, he bent over backwards trying to do that. And clever the way that he asked questions as well. I mean, very helpful. Forced answers out of Boot that I think he wouldn't have otherwise been able to, or wouldn't have just yielded so easily. I can't say the same for Boot. My goodness. Before I get all negative, let me say that the greatest thing about this debate was it was just such a good case study on why the debate is necessary. To have it with a guy like Boot was good because he's consistent. He's one of those. This is what I believe, and
he's clear.
and he's clear.
He puts his position over very well.
Right,
Yeah.
he does. Yeah. So it's not like you're getting a second-rate argument of that position. You're getting a full-scale, consistent approach. He's not. It reminds me a little bit about like Dawkins or something. You know, not to paint him with that brush, but at least you're getting a guy who's just willing to go there, even if he's the fundamentalist atheist guy. You know, you just have to. It's helpful to play with those guys because you end up not having to talk about nothing at all. You get to the actual points. I think the points come through, the big issues all come through in this debate. So I'd highly recommend that people are interested in seeing the difference between a hardcore one kingdom and a hardcore two, well, at least a two kingdom position. This is a great debate to have a look at that. So with that said, as some initial thoughts, over to you guys.
Yeah, Andre, what do you think?
Well, my thoughts are very similar. Exactly. I actually had never heard of Matthew Tuininga before, so it was a very pleasant introduction to him. I mean, because I sort of stumbled across the two kingdom thing by accident. So I hadn't really, it had kind of been the way that I read scripture, and I only and then I discovered it was a thing, a bit the same way I became a Calvinist, like people started accusing me of being a Calvinist, and then I realized, yeah, that's a thing, and I'm probably a Calvinist. So but so I haven't sort of approached it from the kind of academic side or from sort of following the arguments, but I'm discovering the world more and more as it opens up. And the more that happens, the more I realize how, like you say, how important this is. I think I was genuinely, because I know some guys in the UK who are influenced by Joe Booth and reading the book and are attacking the two kingdom thing. And this debate is a live one, even in the college that I went to, the Bible college that I went to. And, I've had guys get in touch with me because of this podcast who are studying in seminaries saying, this is the thing that's happening there. What's your take on it? And so, that's forced me to get involved with it. But yeah, I thought again, same thing. I thought both guys presented their positions very clearly. And sort of unashamedly. And I thought that was a good thing. It made for a lively discussion. But I honestly thought that did enable us to see both the strengths of the two kingdom position and the weaknesses of the one kingdom position. But like little things, I was just reading out, I'd stop the recording and then I'd just repeat what I just heard to my wife. And she found it utterly disturbing.
Right.
Very discerning wife.
Yes, it's totally disturbing. And I think that, I mean, so maybe we can, maybe just to give like an example, just to I know we're just making general comments, but even the points that he was making by way of a critique of two kingdom things. So like, he's talking about it being a luxury of the West. And if you're sitting in cushy Escondido, you can start to talk about common reason and natural law and how these things are, but you couldn't do that in Pakistan or in Iraq or something like that, or because Christians are dying for their faith. I can't remember exactly which country it was that he mentioned, but in the persecuted world, this whole thing is a nonsense because you can't reason.
Yeah.
But what do you want the Christian in Pakistan to do about it? I think this is the question. This is exactly the question.
What about the New Testament? And the persecution of the early church.
Wait, say that again. You went robotic for me.
You went frozone for a second.
Say that again, Mike. You went robotic.
I said, what about the New Testament and the persecution that you see, and Jesus and the cross? Is that not persecution?
Yeah.
Is that not suffering? I mean, when Jesus is standing,
issue, I thought was one of the biggest.
Yeah. I mean, well, Jesus is standing before Pilate and he's saying, my servants are not going to fight. They're not going to change this. I can't think of anything more zenith than that. If my kingdom was of this world, they would, but it's not. So they won't, I mean, dude.
So what I was thinking when I was hearing that was, God forbid, my earnest prayer and supplication is that no Christian in Pakistan hears about this one kingdom way of thinking. Because if they do, it's going to lead to the mass slaughter of countless Christians. But also, if the government in the UK or whatever gets wind of this way of thinking about government, where basically Christians are trying to take over, then that's not going to end well for us either. We've seen this play out in history countless times.
Oh man,
you know.
totally.
So,
Well,
I found it terrifying. Was my overall terrifying. The stakes are high. I know that not everybody is going to take it to its logical extreme like Joe Boot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that even Joe Boot is not taking it to its logical.
That's true.
To its logical end.
That's true.
But the fact of the matter is, when you start going down that line, it becomes very difficult to argue for a more common sense position about how to approach culture. So I think for me, it raised the stakes considerably.
I spent, just and Nick's been there as well. We go to there was a stage in which I went for about 8 years running to India, and just this was actually one of the big things, because on the one hand, one of the reasons that Christianity was being rejected is precisely because it tried to change culture and not just be Christianity in its culture, but had to bring a culture of what they deemed the colonial sort of the West to bear on Indian culture. And so when people started rejecting the West, they started rejecting Christianity as well, and this became a big movement in India, and this has all been on a bit of a snowball for the past however many years. But it's sort of recently reached a climax where now they've closed a few doors to people coming in and so forth. But it's interesting though, because one of the for the last 8 years, or from the last point I was at, which is about three years ago, the number one thing was that they wanted to imbibe a kind of Christopher Wright mission of the church thing, which is, close to what we're hearing from Boot, I think, in that it's just it becomes the gospel is a social gospel, or at least a social program as well. And that, it appeals to a third world context because you want to stop the suffering. You want to stop the injustice. You want to, so if there's a way that Christianity sort of enables you to approach that, to stop it rather than to walk the broken road, so to speak, you're going to take that, and it's going to be dire in it, as you just said, in the consequences, not only in reinforcing rather than removing that thing that was already wrong in it, in the attachment of the gospel and culture, but even strengthening that and furthering that in the minds of the current government, who already are sort of rejecting Western culture and put Christianity all in that pile. You're only going to strengthen that. You're only going to bring about all sorts of furthering of the predicament rather than any improvement of it. So yeah, it's just that statement that he made there. He referenced Brian Mattson, who is another guy who wrote oh man, I can't remember the actual name of the book, but a recent sort of little booklet against Two Kingdom thought. And he basically, I'm glad he did reference Mattson, because he basically quotes him verbatim the whole way through, and uses his argument, down to the wire, even to the quotes and everything, So it was basically a rehash of Mattson's book. And while you guys are talking, I'll look up the title and throw that out there. But one of the things that Mattson does is says, well, it's there's this this is only going to work in middle class white America and so forth, and he follows that through with a few different ways to try and argue that, and you see how well, firstly, not convincing that is in that book, but the way that argumentation on its own exposes that they have set up a ridiculous straw man on this issue. They're not, we're not talking about anything coming out of Escondido yet. We're talking about what Jesus said when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." So we got to keep it there and make sure that they don't derail that. But yeah, more we could say. What do you think, Nick?
Well, let me sort of bet for Boot for a second. I think as I came at the debate, I wondered what it would have felt like if Boot had gone first. I personally think that a lot of the emotional weight is on the one kingdom side. I think there's, it's emotionally freighted because of the issues that we're facing in our culture today.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage is dissolving. The family
Mm-hmm.
is being challenged.
Yes.
Education is an absolute nightmare. Civil rights are being eroded. Religion is being marginalized. These are the problems that our Western culture is facing. And I think the monocovenantal approach is in touch with our fears, in touch with our concerns. It's speaking directly to the nerve of the issue.
Mm.
And when I hear the conversation going on, I mean, Tuininga is playing a defensive, definitional sort of game,
Mm-hmm.
where I think Boot the nature of his presentation is very positive.
Mm-hmm.
It's rousing.
Mm-hmm.
If I was just listening to someone who wasn't schooled and wasn't triggering on a lot of the stuff that he was saying, I would feel drawn along and compelled to want to say, yes, those things matter. Why aren't we doing anything about it? Two Kingdoms doesn't seem to be active enough or doing enough or saying enough. It looks like it's just sitting on its hands and talking about the meanings of words.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's important. I was wondering what it would feel like to have Boot first,
Mm-hmm.
and then have Tuininga play the catch-up game. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that Tuininga opened, I think he stole the show.
Right.
I think he took the wind out of Boot's sails. Boot had to engage with Tuininga and not with the hypothetical Van Drunen case. And so I think that really that set the tone for the debate. And I think Boot was always at a disadvantage because of that, because I think that those things matter. And as a Two Kingdoms person who is on the Two Kingdoms side, I still want answers to those questions.
Yeah.
And I'm still not convinced that Two Kingdoms guys have done enough work in terms of positive agendas in those areas. And so I'm still feeling a lot of agreement with the concerns of the monocovenantal guys.
Yeah.
So I can what I'm saying is I can identify with some of their frustrations as they're critiquing some of the Two Kingdom weaknesses. So
right.
Yeah.
Now, on that point, he did one of the shocking statements. There was that I haven't been able to see much exegesis in Van Drunen's argument. Now, I assume there that he was talking about natural law in the Two Kingdoms, the historical study, which was not an exegetical achievement. But, after that, 2 years after that, so it might well, I'm not sure of the dates and how they correspond to this, but 2 years after he published that, this, hey, I don't know how it just, let's put it this way. If Van Drunen had already released his, what was it called, moral law and the covenants and the divine covenants or something, massive book that is just pure exegesis from beginning to end, really quality. If that was on the shelf at that point when he made that statement, that would be unforgivable. But let's assume the best and say it hadn't come out yet. So just thinking about the moral work aspect, that book has come out, which I think has been very, very helpful.
I haven't read that, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Now, what he does is he hones in on exactly what you said. He says, all right, I realize that, we're sort of on the back foot here defending Two Kingdoms, but let me put a positive case forward. Let me talk about what natural law means and how it might affect things. And then, if that didn't do it for anyone, Politics and Christendom has recently come out this year, Van Drunen's work, which really just goes straight for the kill in that he's basically developing an almost totally positive view of the way that his common grace idea, he really just goes into massive amounts of detail, and I couldn't imagine anyone wanting more. Now, it does presuppose that you've sort of bought into Van Drunen's particular development here, in that, I would argue that Klein wouldn't have necessarily gone in that direction. So it's not that we're saying, you have to go along with Van Drunen. I think there is lots of room for interplay between Doyevet, as we've been talking about, and you could go in some fresh approaches, but at least in terms of what was said in that debate that we're referencing now, there has been a lot more work done. And let me just point people in that direction if they are interested, especially on this natural law deal. So that's something worth saying. But it's
Mm.
not the end of the story. You know, it's not like we've done the work and now that's it. I think it's an abiding issue, and there's going to be all sorts of things that some people are comfortable with, other people aren't. How does general and special revelation, as Boot mentioned toward the end, he'd like to see more work done on the general revelation piece and the special revelation interplay, and I think that's legitimate. You know, that's just something that we have to constantly be working on.
Yeah. That I think it's always unfortunate the way sort of language develops in these things, because you know, if you have one side being called the transformationalist side, then the implication is the other side is not concerned with transforming anything. And
Yes.
and I think that's, you know, there's always a certain amount of labeling that's unhelpful in these sorts of things, but it's not, it's certainly, at least my understanding of it is that, you know, from a Two Kingdoms point of view, it's not that I don't want to see, you know, the Christians as salt and light in the world having an influence on society and for the better. It's just about how that's done, whether that's part of the church's mission, whether that's part of our secular vocation as individual Christians, or whether or not Christians can establish Christian organizations which are possibly for that purpose. You know, it's just a distinction between essentially the gospel and the church's mission.
And then also what the expectation of that, you know, effect on society would be.
Yes.
You know, is it eschatological?
Exactly.
Which, you know, it was interesting to see the way that I mean, we've said it the whole time, right?
Yeah.
That was the key. That is, and it showed itself to be true in this debate. Eschatology is the key to this whole thing. But you know, you see that
and
come
on
out.
that, I had never before really considered, you know, Van Druenen's critique that ultimately this is going to land on our understanding of the gospel and our understanding of justification and all that kind of thing. And I always thought that, that's just really unhelpful language. But in this debate, I saw it for the first time.
He denied the covenant of works.
Yeah. And so what you're going to end up with
is an earthquake.
And
Shada.
I mean, it wasn't. So it was multiple. So we need to talk about the covenant of works thing, because that's a recurring problem in this whole debate. But the other side of it as well, the denying of the common grace covenant in Noah, also does lead directly to this problem, because you end up saying we need to redeem creation by doing these social transformation things, and that is always going to lead to a muddling of the, are we, you know, how are we going to save the world kind of thing. And it just for the first time, and like I say, it's because most people stop short of what Joe Booth is saying, and most people will not allow themselves to go to the natural ends of the argument. But seeing him speak and hearing him speak and the way that he answered questions really did highlight that this could, and in some sense will, have an impact on our understanding of the gospel.
Law and gospel were not a thing for him. Law and gospel were not. They were as a moment. I mean, you can't.
It's a law gospel.
It's a gospel.
Yeah,
as we said before.
Gospel.
You know, and you know, I thought it was great the way that Tuininga pushed back on his whole. You know, he was talking about national curses and blessings there for you know, for a session. It was quite like, I'm like, you are not serious. We are going all the way with this. That's amazing. You know, as if, you know, we're somehow still in this covenant, this mono covenant. He even referred to it in the singular the whole way through, which was really interesting. But you know, I think one of the things that just we got to talk about the covenant of works. We got to talk about the eschatology piece as well. Being the podcast that we are, I thought one of the key statements of this whole thing, if people go and listen to this, was that, you know, he, in a bit of an outburst, said, I cannot live in two ages. I must live in one age. And I thought, well, there we have it right there, because that's the whole, we are two age sojourners. That's the whole thing. In fact, we'd say that's quintessential for healthy Christianity, that you understand that there is an age that is to come that is in tension with this current age. And if you choose to live in one age or the other and not both in tension at some level, I mean, you're bound for one or another problem there. So
Yeah.
that's a
But
huge issue.
I do think that that cry of frustration is the cry of frustration of the Christian life. So
Yeah.
like I understand it's difficult to live in two ages, like,
Mhm.
but that is the whole point. The whole tension is
In but not
this
of.
world is not our own.
Now,
Yeah.
here's one of the things that I think Tuininga didn't bring out. He had a bit of an opportunity, and he could have. And Van Drunen does bring this out well because one of the things I really like about Van Drunen is he's so lucid. He just does not allow a point to pass him by without pinning it down. It must be the simple, lucid thing that it is before he moves on. And so he goes, okay, well, look, what do we, so one of the more helpful areas of his work has been to compare, what he's saying as a reformed two kingdom project advocate to someone like the two cities of Augustine, or that paradigm, or the two ages, which is kind of what we're alluding to here, and what Tuininga in that debate alludes to. He says, well, maybe we should start using the language of age rather than
Good.
kingdom, and you see that interplay a little bit with political church. Who's Jonathan Lehman?
Jonathan
Political
Lehman.
church. He makes the same suggestion, and then they, Tuininga and Lehman go at it for a little bit, and they kind of come away with some ideas around that. Just, I think if anything else, just if nothing else, at least just highlighting the eschatology piece again. But what Van Drunen says that doesn't get enough press, and I think this must be factored in, is that no one's disagreeing with two ages, at least amongst the various proponents of the two kingdom view. That's important. That's a thing. That's eschatology. But the two kingdoms doctrine isn't exactly parallel or overlapping with that doctrine. It's what the two kingdoms doctrine is thinking only about this age. So it really does address Joseph Booth's issue 100%, because the two kingdoms idea is a way to not think about the age to come. We're not going to have to worry about two kingdoms in the age to come, right?
Yeah.
It's a way to think about this age. So we're dealing with
Yes.
this age part of the two ages,
Amen.
and its interplay with the common
The two
grace
realities that we're interacting with.
Exactly. And so I wish that had come across a little bit clearer in the debate, but that meets what Joe Boot was saying, I think, in that he wants to live in one age. Fine, the debate only revolves around one age anyway. I mean, firstly, we'd say that I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say I want to live in one age only, because you must have a foot in the age to come as a Christian. But if you
unless that's what he's talking about, I want to go to heaven.
Right, I would err on that side. Yeah, but it sounded like he was, very happily admitting his post-millennial, very, very, very optimistic amillennialism, and willingness to kind of see a kingdom that they bring in, kind of, to take its full expression, and that wouldn't surprise me with everything else I know. But the bottom line is, even if that's the case, we're just dealing with a way to approach this age with the two kingdom doctrine anyway. So I think that just needs to be on the table. That's something. And again, with the Augustine thing, you've got a difference there, because I think if Joe Boot and Augustine would probably agree that there's a kingdom of God and kingdom of Satan, basically, and these are the only two kingdoms he's worried about. Well, the thing lacking really in Augustine from a two kingdom perspective, and that what comes out later with Calvin and with Luther, and with theologians that have tried to balance it out, is the commonality. It's true that there are these antithetical ideas, not ideas but realities, kingdom of God, kingdom of Satan, but God also has ordained that there be a shared stage for this age. And so, and this is founded on two distinct covenants. So, these are things you have to be clear on.
Yeah, for sure.
So would it be, sorry, Nick, would it be helpful to begin to talk about it as a kind of three kingdom thing? Right, because it seemed like he was stumbling over that. And I know that this is something that gets checked up from time to time, but that way of understanding that actually we're not trying to say that there is no satanic kingdom, or that isn't a factor. I mean, I'm just asking the question. What do you guys think?
I think the nature of the kingdom is that it's kingdom inaugurated and kingdom consummated. It's the same kingdom, but it's already not yet. So there's not technically a third.
That's true.
It's just
And also, what does come up in the two kingdom discussion a lot on any reformed trajectory, especially around, one of the things he mentions Kuyper a lot, but Kuyper's like, as Van Drunen rightly points out, Kuyper's as two kingdom as you can get. In fact, all the post-Kuyperian Kuyperian guys are all like, hey, Kuiper is just, he's on another team. And in fact, I was really happy to see that Joe Boot sort of was willing to say Kelvin was really quite down the line with his medieval kind of willingness to go along natural law theory and so forth. And I think all of those guys, they were very close. What Doyevidians would now call Gnostic, not Gnostic, at least dualistic. I think that's wrong. I don't think they were dualistic, but at least he admits that Kelvin, and he should have perhaps admitted that Kuyper. I mean, these guys are very two kingdom. They speak our language at every level, and it really only changes after Doyevid. Maybe there's some question mark over Doyevid himself, but beyond Doyevid, it just starts becoming this one kingdom idea. So, I think one of the things that you have to just keep in mind there with our discussion of it now, just coming back to you, Andre, is that the antithesis thing at least has gone nowhere. It's there. Augustinian antithesis all the way through, Kuyperian antithesis to Doyevidian antithesis to Van Tillian antithesis to Kleinian antithesis. I mean, it's there. No one's surrendering the deep-seated antithesis, the bestial nature of the city. It's common, but it's inclined towards. It's Klein. I love the way Klein puts it. The city of man is inclined towards becoming the cult of man, and is in this constant drift. So everyone's been saying that. No one's denying the antithesis at all. You'd have to literally create a straw man of ridiculous proportions to say that, that we are somehow forgetting.
No one's calling it neutral.
Yeah. And so I think, I've also explored that because Luther did a three kingdom thing. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting. Let's go down the Luther three kingdom route. And he really sort of made that, I think, more explicit than anyone else. But when it comes to, I keep coming back to Van Drunen's comment in that, what is the doctrine? It's really just to ask how the church, as the redemptive kingdom, God's kingdom, right, the kingdom of this age that will be consummated, interacts with what is also God's kingdom in that which he has created. I mean, whose covenant is Noah's covenant? It's God that gives him the covenant. It's all God, and it's all in that sense from God. And so that's the question we're wrestling with. We're not talking about what is obviously usurping their position, like a satanic kingdom would be, and illegitimate. There's no legitimacy in the satanic kingdom. We're asking what is from God, what is legitimate. So I think to have that question up front, what are we actually talking about, is actually really helpful in coming up with names. Two governments I like. That could work. That's a whole nother
two swords. I've heard one of the Puritans use.
Well,
God has two kingdoms, and there are two swords. There's the sword of the word, which the church wields with the gospel, and there's the sword of government, which God puts in the hands of the unbelieving.
The problem with that is it comes straight out of Galatius' two-sword theory, who was, 100% Christendom. And basically the whole idea there, interestingly enough, if anyone cares, with Galatius, this is like Pope Boniface and so forth. You got this one Christendom and two swords within one Christendom. So it's quite interesting because they're not actually even dealing with the issue of antithesis with the world. They've gone, the world is Christian, now how do we manage the world, and that's the two swords.
Dividing the responsibilities amongst God's servants.
Yeah, exactly. So in some sense, it's part of this two kingdom greater dynamic and trajectory. But what we're talking about is a lot more defined and covenantal.
Sword and trowel?
Wasn't that like a
Ezra Institute?
Oh, no. I thought that was a particular irony.
Yeah.
The Ezra Institute. Yeah, because that's like anyway, more to say there. Okay.
Yeah, man. So I thought maybe we should just dig into the antithesis between the mono-covenantal and the two covenants, where it's very clear that Tuininga has a covenant of works, and Boot denied that there was a covenant of works. He emphatically denied it.
Oh yeah,
and he called it the covenant of grace. And so let's drill down into.
Do you know what I would have asked Boot at my knee-jerk question would just be, okay, so there's no covenant of works at all. I imagine he would have said emphatically, no covenant of works. No one where anyone has to earn anything. No. What on earth is the Pactum Salutis? What on earth is Jesus sent to do? Was Jesus given what he was given by grace apart from
Well,
his works.
genuinely, would he accept the Pactum Salutis? Would he?
I don't know.
Does he have
It
a
left a
congregation?
real question mark over that, because
All
I
we
know
say by one man's obedience. Romans 5.
exactly. And going on, everything I've read on minor covenantalism and the issue, it's, I think this comes out very clearly in Frame's what do we call it? Rant, maybe? No, it's too harsh. His book against his response to the Reformed Two Kingdom thing, and he's written a book, a whole book about it, and what you see it come out. He's like, listen, I'm very loath to think of the covenant of works as being this kind of merit thing. And then he goes, but then what are we to make of the second Adam? So he goes there, at least makes the connection. And it's all sorts of funny things start happening, in my opinion. You look at it, I think it comes apart at that point because, it's almost like, well, Jesus gets what he gets as God, not as man.
Ooh,
It's
wow.
like now
So
all of a sudden,
was he representing us or not? Anselm, why the God man?
exactly. It just calls into question. Now, again, we're not being completely fair. I haven't got quotes and whatnot, but that was the basic takeaway. I was just like, there was that clarity that we need. We must have clarity on what Jesus did, certainly, as our mediator, and what the covenant of works from eternity is, as far as what he came to do. At least for anyone that's bought into the covenantal theology concept, maybe for those that are just denying the whole thing, they got some other way, but for someone in the Reformed camp to just go, right, we're federalists now, our federal representative has not earned our salvation for us. I mean, what the heck?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I mean, I can see the appeal of running Adam and Noah as a parody. So you've got Adam set up in a covenant of grace according to the monocovenantalists, and he's given the dominion mandate. The fall comes, and God's very gracious. He sets Noah up in a covenant of grace and gives him the dominion mandate. It looks like a copy and a paste.
Yes.
And so, Noah did a blood sacrifice, which was propitiating, which was for the whole world. And he was the head of the church, and they set it up in such a way as to make him appear like another Christ or another Adam. And that they read so much continuity that they end up reading back into Adam a covenant of grace instead of seeing it as a covenant of works. And so not seeing those two things as distinct is a denial of the gospel. Yeah.
Well, and you know what Klein says about... Sorry,
that's more or less what Gary Williams did as well.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
No, I was just saying that was Gary Williams's thing.
Yeah. One of the issues that comes up is that you see, again, just the next copy and paste after Noah. Before I get onto this, remind me to come back to Abraham. Okay. But just, did you notice the way, just following on from our last conversation about Gary Williams, did you notice the way that he just exegetically made zero distinction between the pre-diluvian Noahic covenant and the post-diluvian, even before you conclude that they were two different covenants? What he was reading all his point from the pre-diluvian thing that happened into the post-diluvian thing with no grounds whatsoever. And I found that to be like, I think that would be that would be reason to make to offer a strong pushback. Anyone that's interested in that, go and buy that latest essay from Van Pelt, who I love. I just love that he's the Hebrew guy. I love that he's the guy who teaches everyone Hebrew. Everyone who knows Hebrew knows it because Van Pelt taught it to them, and then he tells you what's actually going on with the
Hebrew text.
from with Noah's situation. But so there we go. There's I'm totally aboard. Everyone agrees with what he was saying pre-flood. The issue is that there's something else going on post-flood. So we're all agreeing that Noah pre-flood is part of this covenant of grace. Amen. But post-flood, there's something else that can't be squared with that pre-flood revelation.
There's a refracted dominion mandate.
A refracted dominion mandate. There we go. Now you come to
well, you just can't. But even at a basic level, even at a very simple basic level, you just can't read it as if the fall didn't happen. So that it just like that's the problem. Like yes, there's duplication in the language. Yes, there's a kind of you get all the same new creation language and the mandate restated and all that kind of thing. But to read that as if it's like whoops, fall, that has no bearing on what's about to happen going forward. You have to at least make an effort to see, well, in light of the fall, what's different about this? And I think that part of it, which is just, it seems so obvious and so, so basic, and yet that's the part that often you don't hear about. Like, oh well, obviously there's this massive thing called the fall that's changed everything, and now we have to read the Noah covenant in light of that as well. So not just the pre-diluvian, post-diluvian, but also just Adam pre-fall and Noah post-fall as well.
Yeah, and what they would say, as far as I'm aware, is that the fall happened, but Christ came and basically, fixed the fall problem to the point that we can now retroactively, from the point of Adam onwards, like so Noah and anyone in the covenant of grace, basically pick up where Adam left off without a hitch, because that's what Jesus would do and has done, and and now we just keep going with the same single thing that God had planned. That's all good and well, but there are two things wrong with that. Number one, it presupposes there was no eschatology in view prior to the fall, which I think came through brilliantly clearly in the debate. There is no end. I mean, it was just a paradise covenant.
What is the Sabbath for then?
Yeah, just the Sabbath, the exegesis of the 7 days left out, I think, 100%. And then moving on from that, you're like, okay, it's fine to say Jesus came and fixed it, but how did he fix it? We're back onto this merit thing. Like, what did he do to fix it? And how did he not earn righteousness? Are we really going to ditch active obedience? Are we just going to go with passive obedience? Because that's all you got at that point, and look, Norman Shepherd, that's where it goes. You don't want to have to, and that's where Bonson went, and that's the whole deal. So you've got that. But now coming back quickly, just to this little point that I think often gets omitted again, because you got that cut and paste you were talking about, Nick, with the way, there we go. Noah's the next guy. Okay, fine. Now the next guy after that is Abraham.
Yep.
Where you get the next big cultural mandate commission thing, where go and populate.
Be a blessing
to
all nations.
Exactly. Yeah. Do the whole deal again. What I think is such a convincing point, and I've tried to labor on this in some of what I wrote there, but I think I love this point, and I think this is something that Paul himself drives home. When you're thinking about Abraham versus Adam, you're trying to create that parity again. God blesses Adam and Eve and says, all right, now from your God-given blessing, go forth and multiply and bring in this thing, do this thing. It's from your God-given ability that this goes forward.
Yeah.
You think about how that squares with Abraham. The whole thing is profoundly antithetical to that. It's from your absolute barrenness and inability, to the point that this even becomes the very reason that Paul says, hey, hoping against hope, he was saved, and so it's only in the inability and of the promised son, which is again something that he drives home again and again, that this great multiplication event would happen and the blessing to all nation would come. It would be decidedly not because Adam was able to do it through any natural God-given ability at that point. It would be supernatural from beginning to end. It is the divine promise that we're talking about. And I mean, the whole narrative in Genesis makes a point in just highlighting that over and over again. This is why most of that stuff is happening, just to highlight the fact that if God doesn't do it, no one's going anywhere, and I mean, wow, doesn't that just strike you as there's something different there? Something different going on? The one is like not of works, the other one is, it's just something to consider as people work that through.
It's good.
Yeah. Now, on the issue of law and gospel, one of the other things I wanted to talk about, just so we don't lose out on this, is what I thought of the more interesting questions that came out of it was whether suffering is normative for the church. Did you notice that was a big question?
One.
That was a good, because it's sort of like on the one hand you want to go, but then on the other hand, I don't know, I have to admit I've never really suffered.
Yes, you have, brother.
Well, how?
The world, the flesh, and the devil. We have more than one enemy.
There we go.
Yeah.
Amen. So,
Romans 7 is your suffering.
Right. Now, if that's true, then I think that is an amazingly powerful point for the normative suffering of the church. That again, if he's not factoring that in, where does that leave us?
Yeah.
what kind of triumphalism are we actually talking here? Now you've got a national works blessing um, gospel, okay,
Yeah.
mixed with a triumphalism, not only on this eschatological sort of redemptive historia sort of thing, but even to the extent that we're denying the reality of cross carrying, in all these various ways, and our suffering in the world as Christians. I mean, dude, I'm seeing a real recipe for major
I mean,
problems.
this is where the amillennial does shine against the post-millennial perspective on how the kingdom is brought in. And Hendrickson just does it so well in More Than Conquerors, where he highlights the paradoxical nature of our victory, that we conquer through sacrifice.
I love what Tuininga said.
Yeah.
What's the message of Revelation?
Exactly. That's
you
where
want to conquer,
Revelation 12, verse 9 to
endure.
11.
Yeah.
They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by their word of their testimony, that they loved their lives not unto death. That's how they overcame Satan.
Yes.
They overcame Satan by Satan killing them.
Yeah.
And then heading into the intermediate state, into a greater realization of the kingdom that's already come. The first resurrection into that intermediate state. And
I mean, this is like the fiber of Christianity.
Amen. And so and the paradox of Christ conquering through sacrifice, Christ conquering through being the defeated one. And so I heard of a lion and I saw a lamb slain. And that's the church as we walk in the footsteps of Christ. I mean, for me, that's the glory of the Christian life.
That's the whole thing, right? Like you get,
it's
Jacob being struck in the hip, and just losing so that he wins, and God being the one who wrestles for him, and
and so we're always called to be like Christ in our sufferings, committing ourselves to Him who judges justly, not answering in turn. I mean, Peter's whole ethic for suffering is like Christ in the way in which he submitted himself to it, in the same, ordering under humiliation.
Exactly. And if you take that point, right, and if you take Booth's point, where I can't remember where it was that he said this, but he basically said, I hear a lot of this kind of pilgrim language and suffering language in the two kingdom position, but not enough talk about the kind of soldier language that you also find in scripture.
Ephesians 6.
If you take that point, right, and you detach it from the fact that the whole revelation thrust, that the way that we fight is through the word of our testimony and our suffering.
Yes.
Amen. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal.
Then what it means to be a soldier is to take your sword and cut off the servant's ear, which is precisely the thing that Jesus told Peter not to do.
Exactly.
And it's right at the whole. Now we're back to where Jesus is standing before Pilate saying, "My kingdom's not of this world. If it were, my disciples would fight for me."
Exactly. And the spiritual armor of Ephesians 6. I don't know if you realize what Tuininga did there. Did you hear his exegesis on Ephesians?
Oh, totally.
So Christ ascends up into heaven, Ephesians 4. In verse 7 to 16, he gives gifts to men. Here come the gifts from the conquering king.
And what are the
gifts? He's taken his throne. He's taken his authority. He pours out his spirit upon the church to equip them for what's coming. Put off the old man, put on the new, be good husbands and wives, submit at the workplace, and put on the spiritual armor.
If you're a slave, be a Christian slave.
There's the Christian life in the two ages right there.
Yeah. No, I mean, wow. And one of the things that I kept on just surfacing in my mind as I was listening to it, just listening to Booth's side of things, and again trying to just get his perspective and feel something that I'm always on the lookout for something that I might have missed, or just I don't want to make myself sound too noble here, but you know what I mean. Like I think we're always doing that. We're just going, okay, well, there's a chance I missed something. Let me hear him out. He's a good representative of the position, so let me try and really feel him on this stuff. And I just what kept happening was just thinking about Klein's thing, where he's like, listen, it is nearing the point of blasphemy to say that as you look back on church history, if we're talking about normative states of suffering, blah, 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 you think about the way in which the Spirit has been at work in church history. It has not been through the triumph, model at all. It's through, I mean, the blood of the martyrs is at stake here. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about the way in which the minority, marginalized, persecuted church through pockets of the ages have been not only not a failure, but the greatest, most amazing triumph of the gospel, and what any talk like Boots' talk is really diminishing that triumph. It's saying that at some level they failed to engage and transform their culture.
Yeah, I mean, there's just one thing that Boot did as well, and he towards the end, because they started off with towards the end of the presentation, he was talking about Calvin's Geneva and the Puritan Project in America and William Carey abolishing the burning of widows. I just wanted to stop him and say, hang on, don't claim William Carey. He wasn't a monocovenantalist.
No.
And he didn't go to India seeking to bring in your vision of the kingdom. He went there to go and preach the gospel to the heathen. And while he was there, his Christian conscience couldn't help it. He did something, but he didn't go there with the kingdom agenda that he's trying to. I felt insulted that he tried to claim Carey for his cause at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I empathize with how Kleinians must feel when Baptists like Klein.
Because I've just been reading through Nick Needham's church history things, so it's kind of like I've just come through the end of the second volume on the medieval church, and all throughout the whole thing you have this power struggle going on. Either it's usually the Pope who's claiming authority for himself, either over the emperor or over the East or over somebody else, and they don't want to give it. And so normally there's a struggle going on there. But as you look back over church history, and I think this is a point that Tuininga made. It's like, well, what period in church history do you think this worked well? Like where do you want to go to find the model of how this one kingdom thing works?
Yeah, because we had political power there for a while. Yeah.
Well, he goes to the Puritans. In his book, for him it's the Puritan
I'll be honest
Project.
with you, the Puritans were a dog show in lots of ways. Like, I mean, it
where are the Red Indians? Where are the American Indians?
I mean, exactly, and so there were maybe like about 10 good years. I just think, but the whole expanse of church history. Has been a massive failure whenever the church has had political power. It's been
as soon as the church starts killing other Christians, you've got problems. It's
which inevitably happens.
Yeah,
because
and the Puritan Project was on a blank canvas. The new, in terms of
you don't get better than that.
Yeah,
you don't get a better opportunity. Yeah,
it's a bit of a false scenario.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So I mean, these are massive points, and even just I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the William Carey thing, and just a lot of anecdotal stuff in there. And I feel like if we go into this, we're going to end go into a whole new podcast. But maybe what we should do is come back to Brian Matson's book. It's called Cultural Amnesia, by the way, which is all of that stuff was coming straight out of Cultural Amnesia, and Christian stir fry, the whole deal, with trying to do trying to do the whole thing. One of the things that they do though, which what he was doing in this debate is he wasn't interacting with what, like at any substantial level, with what Van Drunen, as he leans on Klein, are saying, because there, if anything, what you would say is, he's talking about there's a cultural homogeneity that exists. As a result of, he used the polio vaccination thing, that, the only reason we don't have polio is because of the polio vaccination. And Christianity is like that. Like the only reason we experience a cultural sameness with unbelievers is because of Christianity. So that's their big argument against what Two Kingdom people are saying, when we're saying, well, there's a common grace preservation in play at that point. It's not because of transformationalism. So they look at that and they start saying, well, they bring out all these illustrations that you mentioned earlier. But what Klein's looking at is he's not once going into Western civilization. He's not even thinking in that realm. He's thinking about ancient Near Eastern civilization. When he makes the argument for common grace, he's speaking almost totally within the realm of Hittite treaties and Babylonians and that sort of thing. And I mean, there is zero. Christianity didn't exist to create that cultural sameness. They couldn't have been. Their argument just does not work in terms of the very substructure that Van Drunen bases his argument covenantally on. So I think I would, for anyone that does want to check that out, I would just ask them not fall into that anecdotal stuff, because it's really and like when he talks about a Christian stir fry, for example, versus like I don't know, food laws, that might be in existence, or what Darwin's comment was when Darwin said, if you get stuck on one of these islands, just hope it's one that's met with the gospel. Like, look, no one needs to deny that is true, right? That there's a preserving and a witnessing reality for that takes place when the gospel takes root. But that's a different thing to saying that the gospel mandates that you cook food a certain way. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, it's not the same thing. It's really, it's refuting an error as to what others might say about food. That's for sure, and it might be dismantling some existing worldview. But it's certainly to jump into saying, well, therefore Christians do make stir fry a certain way, and therefore there is Christian stir fry and Christian plumbing. It's just like such a ridiculous leap of logic.
He contrasted that with the Sharia law.
Yeah.
And the irony for me was that it sounded like you wanted to create a Christian version of the Sharia law.
And that was, I felt that.
Well, that is the key. I mean, and this is another discussion altogether, but as a theonomist, which he clearly is, and he loves Rushduni, basically what he wants to do is he wants to use law as basically the document with which we go to the nations.
Yeah, it is coming.
Set up Christian governments.
Yeah.
Because, and we shouldn't be happy with the common grace scenario where other countries have governments. We should be seeking to Christianize those governments with the Bible. And so that's what he's always fighting for. He's fighting for a Christian activism in the political realm with the post-millennial agenda on a monocovenantal basis. And I'm happy for his activism. I'm happy for his concern. There's just too many things lost in his project.
Yeah. Now, I would have made the quip that, hey, at least William Carey and all Baptists are immune. But next we'll come back to James White and his interaction with Boot. And I don't know, even.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need to deal with it, because I think Boot is the root problem.
Right.
And we've dealt with Boot.
You're just scared of James. That's all.
That's
all that's happening. You can admit it. It's
James
okay to
was a confessional 1689 Baptist. I don't know what he is anymore. I look at the friends he's hanging out with, and I'm growing more and more concerned. I think his activistic inclination has led him down a garden path. So I don't know where he stands theologically, but the people he's bringing in to confirm certain perspectives, we've dismantled that perspective.
When talking about two kingdoms, one of the things that is just a point that needs more study, and I think there have been some great studies on this, is that the way Baptist thought and two kingdom thought are really hard to distinguish in some ways, because the very idea of a gathered church that is by profession of faith, I mean, that is really, you can't mess around with that when you have to, especially when that church becomes persecuted or marginalized as it was, until the 1689, pretty much. You've got this difficulty that they're working with. It's a rich area I mean, ecclesiology does matter. You see it in the Presbyterian debate as well, with the spirituality of the church. Ecclesiology is an important point that we haven't really touched on yet. But I think, normally speaking, Baptist theology, just at a basic level, should protect you from a lot of this. But I think the problem is people aren't really consistent with what they hold to. So it's hard to say that about James White, because he doesn't know stuff.
I said I don't know.
Yeah. So I think we must come back to it. I think we must look at that talk that he does with Boot and just have a think about how that rolls.
Well, it's particularly the end of that talk. I mean, the first bit of Joe Boot's talk, he's just riffing on the changes that have taken place in society, and all that's good.
Well, he opens with a quote from this debate.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't actually listened to the whole thing. Yep, good.
The foggy. He makes. You'll see a reference
that's
to
right,
the foggy two kingdoms.
Yeah. Okay.
That's Boot's opening statement as he's addressing Van Drunen, or his conception of Van Drunen, not Tuininga.
Yeah, that's true.
There we go. Alrighty. Well, we're getting on in this.
As mentioned, did Gill have much to? Did Gill have anything to say about the two kingdom thing?
Well, again, Baptist, he did, and I mean, you got to remember, Gill wasn't, classic example, because he couldn't go to school. because he was a Baptist, right? His parents were Baptist at least, and so he is this genius that can't go to school pretty much. So he gets to learn Greek by studying, by glancing through the bookseller's shop and seeing the textbook, and then he gets so freaking awesome that eventually they give him the doctorate, and go on. But the bottom line is, I mean, he felt that he would have been the kind of Baptist I'm thinking about here, even beyond that. That point at which the 1689 could be written.
Don't you want to go back to those days, guys? Those were the good old days.
Nah, I like dentists. I like doctors. I like medicine.
Yeah, it would be tough. It would be tough. But, it's, I don't know. You might not have to long for much longer, Andrea.
Yeah, I'd probably be dead by now. I'm like 45. 45 this year.
I just like to state for the record that I was being sarcastic. It was pure sarcasm. But it hasn't been detected.
I often watch movies, with Candace, and like there'll be this terrorist thing where a guy gets taken captive and he's like in this prison cell for 3 days, and I'd be like, "Oh, day one, I'd need my meds. If I couldn't get my meds, like I feel like that would be me gone, Day two, like if I just need to have a shower and take my meds and I need to go to the toilet and do all that stuff, I'd be dead 3 times over by the time the guy gets released, So yeah, I don't think I'd fare well at all. But hey. At least we get to build on the shoulders of those who did suffer for this cause. But it's something I'm a Baptist and Two Kingdom and Kleinian guy, so you can tell why I get the triple vortex going on this subject. It's important. I see it as important for many different reasons. But let's stop it there because we're into like nearly an hour.
That's good.
A little bit, and we'll come back to this. Go check out the debate if you want to, and stay
it's
tuned.
great. It's worth it.
Yeah, we'll probably be circling around the subject for a little bit. And we'll see you next week. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.